Hi, it's Nathan here, and today we're talking about Section 27 of the Model WHS Act. This is a very important one and one that is commonly talked about because it is the duty of officers. So the primary duty of care, which is Section 19, relates to the business or the PCBU, be the owner of the company for a sole trader, but most companies are set up in like a proprietary limited structure, so where the business is the PCBU, and then the owners and directors, CEOs, that sort of stuff are all officers. So there's a lot of people out there that are very concerned about what is this Section 27 and what does it mean for them. So first of all, what is an officer? That is defined under the Corporations Act, and there's essentially two criteria, and it's one that the first one is someone who makes or participates in decisions that affect the whole or a substantial part of the company. And then the second bit of criteria is someone who has the capacity to affect the financial standing of the company, or someone who has financial control within the company. So I'll give you an example. So people who generally meet the requirement or meet the definition of officer would be CEOs, directors, general managers, maybe operations managers. I can give you an example. I had a discussion with a project manager who was saying, well, what are my legal duties? Am I an officer? What happens if something happens here? And now my understanding is a project manager, you wouldn't probably be an officer, and we'll get that into that in a second, but you are still a worker, and workers have legal duties to take care of yourself, take care of others, follow policy, follow procedure. So now if you are just a worker and you're in a supervisory role like a project manager, or you're instructing people to do things, you have a legal duty to take care of others. So if you're instructing workers to do something dangerous, you're breaching your legal duty as a worker. But so is the project manager an officer? And then we apply the criteria. So do they make decisions that affect the whole or a substantial part of the business? Potentially, but probably not, depending on the size of the company. If there's multiple projects and they're just one project manager on one project, they're probably not at that high level of decision-making capacity. And then in terms of financial control or being able to affect the financial standing of the company, just because you've got a budget, just because you've got a credit card doesn't mean you have financial control. So the example I ask people is, let's say you're in a medium-sized construction company. Can you go and buy $100,000 truck tomorrow without asking the boss for approval, or without having the boss question that? If the answer is no, then you probably don't meet that other criteria as well. So it doesn't mean that you have no duties at all. It just means that you're not an officer. So then what must an officer do? So an officer must exercise due diligence in ensuring that the business or the PCBU complies with their duties. And then it breaks that down. Easy way to remember it. There's 5 core ones. So it's basically what an officer must do to exercise due diligence is stay up to date and stay informed on WHS matters. So for example, if you're in construction at the moment, you should be aware of new silica regulations and silicosis. It's a big thing at the moment. On top of everything else, you just need to stay up to date with this stuff. Secondly, you need to understand the business and the business's operations and the business's hazards. You can't just, be in the office somewhere saying, I had no idea what was going on. You need to actively try to stay up to date. You need to ensure that adequate systems are in place to manage health and safety risks. So that's where, particularly for larger companies, something like having a health and safety management system and policies and procedures and all these processes comes in very important. Then you need to make sure that adequate resources are available for managing health and safety. So resources could be personnel, could be like a HR, like an actual person, a human resource, like a safety advisor, could be resources for things like plant maintenance, money for maintenance, money for PPE, all that sort of stuff, time to implement all these procedures. And then you need to, the next section or the next part of due diligence is having steps to verify that those resources are effective. So things like internal audits, health and safety inspections, management reviews, management site visits, all of those things help in meeting your due diligence requirements. But for large-ish companies, anywhere over 20 workers, particularly over 50 workers, your best bet in terms of meeting your due diligence requirement is having a full safety system aligned to the ISO standard. In that case, you can say we really tried. We aligned all of our systems to the safety standard. You'll have things like management review meetings where you'll look at resourcing and you'll look at performance monitoring and you'll look at the internal audits and the inspections and you'll set objectives and track statistics, and you'll have inductions and onboardings and procedures and registers tracking everything. So at the end of the day, if something hopefully we prevent an incident from happening, but at the end of the day, if something does happen, you've got a big paper trail of evidence of what you've done in trying to be duly diligent. So yeah, I hope that helps. See you next time.